morning. This is October 6th, and we're going to talk about this day in history. And we're going to start all the way back in the year 1289, when Wenceslaus III of Bohemia was born in Prague, Czech Republic. He was the King of Hungary from 1301 to 1305, and the King of Bohemia and Poland from 1305 until his death in 1306. And with a name like that, Wenceslaus, I couldn't help but wonder, was this the same Wenceslaus from the Christmas song? You know the one. Good King Wenceslaus looked out on the feast of Stephen, when the snow lay round about, deep and crisp and even. So I looked that up. No, the Wenceslaus from the song is based on the life of a historical Saint Wenceslaus I, who was a Duke of Bohemia from 907 to 935. But this Wenceslaus III was probably a descendant of his. You just never know what you're going to get with me, do you? Anyway, then in 1683, the first Mennonites arrived in America. Encouraged by William Penn's offer of 5,000 acres of land in the colony of Pennsylvania and the freedom to practice their religion, the first Mennonites arrived in America aboard the Concord. They were among the first Germans to settle in the American colonies. In 1820, Jenny Lind, the soprano known as the Swedish Nightingale, was born. In 1846, American entrepreneur and engineer George Westinghouse was born in Central Bridge, New York on this day in 1846. He was a prolific inventor and held over 100 patents on creations including air brakes for trains and the alternating current system. He died in 1914 at the age of 67. In 1847, Charlotte Bronte's novel Jane Eyre published in London. In 1866, brothers John and Simeon Reno staged the first train robbery in American history, making off with $13,000 from an Ohio and Mississippi Railroad train in Jackson County, Indiana. Well, actually, trains had been robbed before, but these previous crimes had been burglaries of stationary trains in depots or freight yards. The Reno brothers' contribution to criminal history was to stop a moving train in a sparsely populated region where they could carry out their crime without risking interference from the law or curious bystanders. Train robbery really took off after that. It's a pretty interesting story. I encourage you to check out the links in the description box so that you can learn more about it if you're interested in that sort of thing. In 1892, English poet Alfred Lord Tennyson died at the age of 83. Perhaps you've heard the quote, "'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all." That's Alfred Lord Tennyson. He's the 9th most frequently quoted writer in the Oxford Dictionary of Quotations. In 1908, Emperor Franz Joseph of Austria-Hungary declared annexation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which had been nominally under the rule of the Ottoman Empire. The takeover raised tensions within the Balkan region in Europe and threatened to end in war. In 1914, Norwegian ethnographer, archaeologist, and explorer with a background in zoology, botany, and geography, Thor Heyerdahl, was born in Larvik, Norway on this day in 1914. He died in 2002 at the age of 87. In 1926, Babe Ruth set a World Series record. On October 6, 1926, Yankee slugger Babe Ruth hit a record 3 homers against the St. Louis Cardinals in the 4th game of the World Series. The Yanks won that game 10-5, but despite Ruth's unprecedented performance, they lost the championship in the 7th game. In 1928, in another 4th game of another Yanks Cards World Series, Ruth tied his own record, knocking 3 more pitches out of the same park. That record held until 1977, when Yankee Reggie Jackson became only the 2nd player to hit 3 homers in a single series game. But I'm sure we'll talk more about that when its day in history comes around later this month. In 1927, the first talkie, the jazz singer, opened with popular entertainer Al Jolson singing and dancing in blackface. By 1930, silent movies were a thing of the past. In 1961, President Kennedy urged Americans to build bomb shelters. President John F. Kennedy, speaking on civil defense, advised American families to build bomb shelters to protect themselves from atomic fallout in the event of a nuclear exchange with the Soviet Union. Kennedy also assured the public that the U.S. Civil Defense Program would soon begin providing such protection for every American. Only 1 year later, true to Kennedy's fears, the world hovered on the brink of a full-scale nuclear war when the Cuban Missile Crisis erupted over the USSR's placement of nuclear missiles in Cuba. During the tense 13-day crisis, some Americans prepared for nuclear war by buying up canned goods and completing last-minute work on their backyard bomb shelters. I remember those days. Pretty scary for a little second grader. 1965, the Supremes released I Hear a Symphony, and there's a link in the show notes to that song. 1966, Oriole Jim Palmer, age 20 at the time, was the youngest to pitch a World Series shutout. Showed me a 20-year-old who could do that today. 1973, Yom Kippur War begins as Syria and Egypt attack Israel. In 1976, the Gang of Four was arrested in Beijing. I have a Gang of Four story, but maybe another time. In 1981, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat was assassinated in Cairo by Islamic fundamentalists. He was succeeded by Vice President Hosni Mubarak. Of course, there's plenty more to this story, so I encourage you to click through and read more about it if you're interested. In 1989, American actress Bette Davis died. In 1991, Elizabeth Taylor got married for the eighth time. She was married 8 times to 7 different men, and this was the very last one. Larry Fortinsky, she met him in treatment. She was in for prescription meds, he was in for booze. And there's kind of a sweet story that he tells about how things were with her. There's a link to that in the description also. 1995, the first exoplanet orbiting a sun-like star was discovered. A couple of Swiss astronomers announced the discovery of a Jupiter-like exoplanet that orbits a star called 51 Pegasi. Pegasi is like the plural of Pegasus. 1996, Bill Clinton debates Bob Dole in the first debate of that year's presidential campaign. 2014, a Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded to Hiroshi Amano, Isamu Akasaki, and Suji Nakamura for developing the blue light-emitting diode, LED, which emits low-energy white light that can replace incandescence and mercury-containing fluorescence. And I say, hooray for LEDs. And on that bright note, I think we'll wrap it up for today on this day in history for October 6th. Thank you so much for watching. As always, links to my research are included in the show notes, along with a physical address, if you would like to add to my coffee mug collection. See this one? It's got a bunch of harmony, balance, peace. This is kind of a Zen mug. Anyway, give it a like if you enjoyed this video. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. And feel free to share this if you found it interesting or informative. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. On October, okay, with the notifications. Oh boy, we got our years mixed up. I wondered why it jumped from 1820 to 1926. You funny little bird, what are you doing on the screen? PA? Why do I always say it that way?